Night Vision. Following clues left by our ancestors, we unbury the past to reveal a knowledge of unfathomable value, putting us just a little closer to our own true birthrights. From the secret history of a possible bloodline of Jesus Christ, the secret history of America's founders, to the secret history of extraterrestrial interaction on our planet, here to bring light to the night. Your host for Night Vision Radio, Renee Barnett.
Hey everybody, welcome to Night Vision. So glad that you could be with us this week. I'm excited about this week's show because we're going to hear some new information. And all you people that are interested in these sort of interconnected mysteries of Oak Island and Rennes Chateau, Shugborough Hall, and even others, are going to get some new information tonight, that hopefully will bring us a little bit closer to what exactly those mysteries are all about. Will we ever solve them? I don't know, but we certainly learn a lot along the way. And tonight, returning is prolific researcher and author Cort Lindahl. Hey, Cort.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Renee. I appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to everybody tonight about some new findings.
Absolutely. And, you've done such extensive work in this area and written many books, many blogs, many articles, and had many, many long conversations on the phone with me and others, I'm sure, about what you're turning up. And it seems like you're turning up something new all the time. So I would encourage everyone who is listening to have a look at, is it survivalcell.blogspot.com. Survivalcell.blogspot.com, and that is Cort's blog. Lots of articles on there. What about your books? Are they able to see those on there, or is there another location?
Yes, there's links for the sales of the books there, and they're all on Amazon. If you just word search Cort Lindahl books, a link will pop up that includes all of the publications I've done to date.
That's right, or Bradbury Cort Lindahl, if you want to get fancy about it. But anyhow, yeah, there's that. And then you have a YouTube channel.
I do, Cort Lindahl YouTube channel, where I have over 100 videos that I made myself available there. And I also have Cort Lindahl Patreon. If anybody feels like being a patron, I have some content on there that's only available there as well.
Oh, wow. I have to check out the secret content. You've got a lot of material up there, and I love those videos because even though many of them are regarding, sort of disparate locations, there's a connection among almost all of them. Well, I guess there aren't connections between all of them. So I think that by watching those videos and looking at these different locations and how you're pointing out signs and symbols and findings, that it sort of helps to realize, how extensive some of these mysteries actually run, and how at the end of the day, if you follow the thread long enough, you'll find a connection. They'll be interconnected in some way. And it largely has to do with particular families, in European families, English families, Scottish families, who even before they came over, set up certain things in order to hide things, to draw attention to things by contrast, for people to sort of figure out. And I would imagine that, there were certain family members and others who would more readily recognize the signs in architecture and painting and in stones and things like that. But then, guys like us come along who develop an interest in history and really getting to the heart of it, what really happened, that we start to recognize those signs. And I think that's what your videos do, is it sort of Oh yeah, I remember. I saw that symbol, and then you always explain those symbols and how they're connected. So that's the end of my commercial for you. I might do
Thank you.
another one before we're done. But no, I think I mean, do you kind of agree with that assessment that
Absolutely.
because the body of information is so freaking huge that it kind of helps just to let it, watch those videos, kind of let it wash over you, and then you start realizing you're picking up more clues yourself. I don't know. That's the way it seems to me.
Well, I hope so. I mean, really, one of the parts of everything too is it's kind of like a time bomb, to use a phrase like that, of the memento mori, or a way for past people to make sure that they are remembered as well. And so all of these personal family stories are woven into some of these treasure myths, which doesn't mean there's no treasure. And what a better way to, make yourself remembered than by attaching your family history to a treasure legend. And so some of these things may have been forgotten or neglected throughout history. And when you study these things, like for instance at Rennes-le-Château, you become adept or have learned all about Dagobert II and all of these movements in France that may be involved. And at Oak Island, you remember what Arcadia is, and Philip Sidney and other things like that I feel have been attached to those stories or influenced them as well. So that's also kind of part of the treasure to be found as well. So
and I mean,
lots of different
we hear
things.
about a lot of, a lot of the families, unless you're a real history buff. I mean, there are a lot of families that have, of course, have gone on, to continue to be well-known names. So we've heard a lot about those names, but others, that we didn't really know about, especially European names that we here in the United States, we never studied about them. Certainly in school, before university, unless you went toward a particular, history, bent or major, then you didn't really get these other names and things. So it's like, it's like once you start familiarizing yourself, you start to see those patterns emerging.
Sure,
yourself.
It's like a mystery school.
It's
like the ancient mystery schools, exactly. And a lot of the ones that you and I enjoy and a lot of other people involves the theme of Arcadia.
Yep.
Which is a really ancient kind of value that goes back to Greek mythology and through the Roman poet Virgil and so on, even to one of the Byzantine emperors was named Emperor Arcadius, and various female progeny of them were named Arcadia or Atalanta, which is directly connected to the Arcadian mythology.
Yeah, and it's as though, we hear, as you were saying, there's a lot of treasure stories attached to these things, and I have no doubt in my mind that there at least were some treasures buried and hidden in places. I mean, it was a necessary thing that they had to do, because kingdoms rose and fell, and the Templars got disbanded and all kinds of things. So there's all kinds of ways that treasures could have been hidden. I think they probably were also moved. And then, but it's also like, even if there wasn't a solid material treasure at a specific location, they're still trying to tell you something. They're trying to lead you to something. And it's almost as though, by following these clues and these things, it's almost like an initiation,
Exactly.
into something, it's really wild. And so then you begin to realize as you go along that you're finding stuff, you're finding treasures, you're finding nuggets of information and, things that, actually can kind of correct some of the history books. You may not find a cache of gold, or you might, I don't know. but it seems like the treasure is like the hook. And people think, oh, buried treasure, in certain place. Let's go look for it. But then along the way, as you're following these clues, you realize you're learning an awful lot.
Right. And one of the reasons kind of Arcadia might be involved in a lot of these is because of the original Arcadian treasure story involving a man named Aristomenes. Aristomenes was from Messina, which is just adjacent to Arcadia in Greece, and the Messenians and the Arcadians were having a war with the Spartans. So at one point, Aristomenes believed that he was going to be defeated on his stronghold in Mount Ira there in Arcadia, so he buried a, quote, treasure in Arcadia. And the treasure that he buried from various sources is either described as a statue of Pallas Athena, or more accurately, I think, is a tablet that contained information about the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, that he buried this tablet. So that became in the ancient world something that was quested and looked for, and this story was used later even through a lot of the other stories we're looking at, like Rennes-le-Château, Shugborough Hall, and even is directly referred to at Oak Island, I think, via the work of Philip Sidney in his book Arcadia, that has a passage in the book that is very similar to the original folklore of the three young men finding the money pit on Oak Island. And then as the story goes, they dug down and there were layers of logs every 10 feet and then a graven or inscribed stone at the 90-foot level. All of that's included in the story that Philip Sidney wrote in his book Arcadia.
It sounds a lot like, and you turned me on to this too, Cort, I have to give you credit. It reminds me also of The Gold Bug by Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, yes. Poe was, of course, a brilliant person, and his kind of persona has been kind of clouded, I believe, because really one of his worst enemies in the world ended up with all of his papers after his death, and that's kind of obscured the true, genius of the man in many ways. And in fact, later on in Virginia, I discovered, some, quote, mysteries like the Beale treasure and the legend of the Bruton Vault that did involve the overtones of Poe. I mean, there's even one passage in the Gold Bug where he talks about sitting in the devil's seat and a certain distance from the bishop's house and everything like that even reminds one of Rennes-le-Château of the devil's chair.
The devil's armchair.
Exactly right. So that's kind of interesting in light of that. The famous author Alexandre Dumas, who wrote The Three Musketeers and other famous books, claims that Poe came to visit him in Paris for a 6-month period. And he's the only source that's true. So it's kind of amazing that he would be involved, in either lying about that or spilling the beans and really telling how Poe was kind of like one of these literary figures that I keep running into in my research, like Longfellow, Cooper, Dante, of course, Shakespeare, and all of that is one of the factors where the clues are given in some of these stories, as well as fine art and architecture.
Now, do you think that, like they did in the paintings, like a lot of the paintings, especially, during the Renaissance period and previous were commissioned by these very families, these so-called bloodline families, or these, very, very important elite families, aristocratic families or noble families. What do you think? Were they commissioning people like Poe and asking him to insert certain ideas, or do you think that people like Poe were just already clued in, and so he naturally, added that stuff in to his own work? Or do you think he was collaborating with anyone or any of the other people that have written about these things?
Right. Poe was educated in Scotland and England when he was a young man. So that could have had a large influence on him soaking up some of this information. But there's also an avenue in Virginia of people who are well aware of these things from their family heritage as well, like Thomas Jefferson. So Poe, I think he did know about this, but their goal, along with a lot of other American authors and artists like the Hudson River School and other authors like James Fenimore Cooper and Emerson and Longfellow and so on, all kind of had an interest in presenting the American ideal in these ways of presenting what America is in kind of a mystery school fashion that they knew had been popular in Europe for years. And many of these people had done the grand tour of Europe that were American, like Longfellow spent extensive amounts of time in Europe traveling and socializing with people like Lord Byron and Keats and a lot of the other famous poets of the time. So he soaked all this up, and among his other talents was being a scholar of foreign languages and ancient languages like Latin and Greek. So he was a really good person, like Poe, that was really kind of hyper intelligent, that they meant to present the American ideal in these things. And that's part of what is going on in France at Rennes-le-Château as well. We see some of the later versions of it, like from Pierre Plantard, promoting this kind of conservative right-wing Catholic royalist point of view and using a mystery school technique to do so by presenting us with ideas like the Priory of Zion, or his version of what the Rennes-le-Château story meant to him, whether that's what was intended or not. Sometimes you see national interests kind of putting their own spin on these things because they know it's a learning tool, a golden treasure beckons, and people will pay attention to it and learn whatever is going on and learn all these secrets themselves.
You know, now that you mentioned Pierre Plantard, you know, it makes me wonder what he was up to with that. You know, you're saying, you know, and I know he was, you know, a Vichy Frenchman, you know, he was involved in that, you know, but I never considered any of that in my earlier research into the area. First of all, because, you know, admittedly, I didn't know much about Vichy France and what that actually meant. I don't know a lot about that now, but correct me if I'm wrong. Were they not sort of Nazi sympathizers?
Yes, they were. That was the faction of France that supported or tolerated the Nazi regime in France.
Okay.
And part of what he was doing, I think, too, is he believed he was connected to the original royalty of France.
That's right, he did.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon because the whole theme of Arcadia was appreciated by French monarchs, going way back to René of Anjou, who kind of introduced this idea also to the de' Medici family of Florence. And Lorenzo de' Medici was the first to interpret the poet Virgil into more modern Italian for the first time. And Virgil, of course, even affected the Byzantine emperors and everything over that period, because over time, the works of Virgil came to be viewed somewhat like Nostradamus, like they could be used for divination or what's known as bibliomancy, where you select a random passage from a certain literary work and interpret it with regard to the questions you've asked.
Oh, wow.
And that really is interesting, too, because lately I've come to realize that René of Anjou and his family was actually related to Nostradamus.
Good King René. And
right.
I know that Nostradamus's father, if I'm not mistaken, was the private physician to King René d'Anjou.
Exactly.
Am I right about
connections.
That?
I think
Sometimes
so.
I think I dreamed some of this stuff, but I think I really do remember that.
Well, we have so much packed in there sometimes it's hard to remember.
I'm telling you. They're all swirling around in there.
I think they were also related to each other via family.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
sense.
Nostradamus was a little bit later. There was a family tie there.
It kind of makes sense, you know, because, you know, that would be, if you had a physician in your family, I would think that would be your trusted, your trusted position over other people. So it kind of makes sense that they might have been related for sure.
Absolutely.
But this idea of Arcadia, it's like you talked about it in Greek, and you talked about it in Europe, in France rather, and in it's referenced in England in Shugborough Hall. It's referenced in the New World in Canada with the Acadians. So it's like, is Arcadia more like an ideal? I mean, is that because, you see this in, like, for instance, Thomas Cole, the American painter, I think he was in the late 1800s. He has all these gorgeous paintings of Arcadia. And, what hooked him into that subject so much? I mean, is Arcadia almost seems like the Holy Grail.
In a way, you could say that our true understanding of what it is does enlighten you to all of this kind of underground stream of history where we have all these artist salons and noble people who appreciate this concept of Arcadia that kind of harkens back to a more peaceful and pastoral time. So through history, there's always been other people writing about it and creating fine art that refers to it, sculpture, and even architecture, because I believe that geodesy, or the measurement of the earth and mapping, is part of the kind of like pirate's map that can lead you from place to place where specific structures have directional qualities. And this goes back to the original myth of Arcus and his mother being cast into the sky as Ursa Major for Callisto, his mother, and Arcus, who is the root word of Arcadia and all kinds of other similar words, archaeology, archaic, all time-based kind of phrases that infer time passing. So Arcus, as Ursa Minor, his tail included the pole star or the North Star. So a lot of times when you see what other people refer to as a pentacle, they have all these kind of Hollywood versions of defining that as it being evil or satanic or something like that. But in this case, the star, like the star in the landscape of Rennes-le-Château that Henry Lincoln found, I believe, is an Arcadian symbol. So even what Henry Lincoln found with his array of architecture and places of significance that form a pentacle or five-pointed star, that does infer Arcadia or the North Star. So that's kind of one of the hidden aspects of this. And I believe even like Byzantine rulers like Constantine were aware of this. He created the Daphne Palace in Constantinople that included a central octagonal room, and he named the palace the Daphne after Arcadian mythology involving the nymph Daphne being pursued by Apollo, who was attempting to rape her, and Zeus, seeing this, turned her into a laurel tree, right as Apollo was about to subdue her. So that later translated into the laurel wreath being a sign of victory, kind of representing her escape from Apollo.
Wow.
So that's why he named his palace that. And Constantine also created other structures that are similar, and this all goes back to the Tower of the Winds of Athens, where they were
creating another octagonal
prime meridians or lines of longitude that reference the pole star. That's an Arcadian reference to Arcus and Ursa Minor.
Now, these I know you've done a lot of extensive research on these structures that are placed in interesting places around the world. And largely, what calls your attention to them, if I'm not mistaken, is the octagonal shape, and, the directional lines that can be drawn, because of that structure, that you can actually point to certain things. Is there, and this might be a stupid question, I apologize ahead of time if it is, but is there also a connection between Arcadia and the number 8? I mean, what is the significance of the octagon? Because, I mean, you know, like a hexagon also could point to something.
Well,
or a pentagram could point to something.
Right. It can be any geometric shape. I just think the octagon was selected based on the Tower of the Winds of Athens, which is a little octagonal tower at the base of the north side of the Parthenon in Athens, Greece, where each side of the structure had a corresponding deity that was assigned to a direction of the wind, quote unquote. But within the Tower of the Winds, it's speculated that there was a water clock, and this would have allowed the Greeks to fix longitude, because you need a fairly accurate clock to do that. So they could at least take a crude shot at defining their place on Earth. And the octagonal array is what you have to imagine if you're looking at a globe and you're looking straight down on the North Pole, you see these lines of longitude extending from the center point. So what they were doing is taking each of these locations, like the Tower of the Winds of Athens, and that represented almost the pole where these lines would extend from the center point. So that was the axis mundi, or the center of the world, or the axis of the world.
Axis of the world, yeah.
So they used this to define each culture, and as time went by, nobles would make their own axis mundi. It was like establishing a domain, so to speak. So different shapes could be used, as you mentioned, a pentacle or a hexagon or even a square in certain cases, like the Great Pyramid.
Right.
From plan view. So that became kind of a way for nobles to even define their domain, and people could draw maps of it using Athens as the center, for instance. And over time, they could even collect star readings or use astronomy to compare one place to the other. So this became a valuable practical tool as well. It's not just all based on mythology and religious beliefs. This is feeding into what became science and technology as well.
Sure. But, you know, back to the religious or the spiritual significance. I mean, what struck me when you said the Tower of the Winds being 8-sided, and each side is represented by a different deity, Greek god or goddess, I guess. Do you think because of the religious sort of persecution that was going on in Europe and, you know, the suppression of certain things, particularly, you know, what was called heretical, you know, to the Roman Church, and then, you know, there were fighting going on among those different belief systems. Do you think that that could also have a bearing on why many of these subsequent structures were 8-sided as sort of a nod to their earlier beliefs or their still held beliefs? Or is that just too way out?
No, that's a good assumption, because even we see the Church of Rome, if you go to St. Peter's Square today, which is actually an oval, with the Egyptian obelisk in the middle, they have the so-called windrose markers surrounding it, like we all saw in the Da Vinci Code movie, the second one, Angels and Demons. Yeah. They even used that as a directional clue in the movie. So
you're kidding.
No, each of the windrose markers marks a direction of the wind, just like the Tower of the Winds of Athens. So this was adapted, like, you know, many other pagan beliefs, into the Christian religion as well. So it's kind of a standard, and this could be representative of a lot of the secrets of the cathedrals of Europe and other places like the Tour Magdala at Rennes-le-Château, or the Tower of the Winds copy at Shugborough Hall, the Powder Magazine in Colonial Williamsburg, and the octagonal architecture of Thomas Jefferson as well.
Wow. Do you mind taking a quick question from the chat room, Cort?
Not at all.
All right. We got Neutron with us tonight. Hey, Neutron. Thank you so much for joining us. Neutron is always asks the most brilliant questions, so I have to be careful. I'm glad he's asking it of you and not me. Okay. Neutron says, do you agree that the Kabbalist Tree of Life markings from the boulders on Oak Island are orientation markings for another treasure map whose details are meaningless without the knowledge of the Tree of Life?
Right. No, that's wise. If there's something there that resembles that somebody meant to represent the Tree of Life, then it could absolutely have those qualities. It's at least worth investigating. It could be, I mean, you can't apply this to everything, but it's worth looking at to see if there's a possibility for sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I found some interesting, geographic associations with Oak Island myself that are really interesting, because we all know how the Poussin painting, the Shepherds of Arcadia, is kind of symbolic and has been made that through the Rennes-le-Chateau story and the Shepherd's Monument at Shugborough Hall. If we go to the Louvre Museum today, the Poussin painting is displayed right on the Paris meridian that transects the museum itself. So if you go into the museum to view that painting, you're actually standing on the Paris meridian. And then the orientation of the Louvre Museum actually can be used to create an arc on the globe that points directly to Oak Island. And not only does it point to Oak Island, it matches the angle or orientation of Nolan's Cross to within 3/1000ths of a degree, which is an exact hit, because back in the day they couldn't measure 1/1000th of a degree on the globe. That's only a modern affectation. So I believe somebody arranged that on purpose. And amazingly, this is the part that will freak a lot of people out. In the closing scene of the movie The Da Vinci Code, they are showing you this.
I'm trying to remember the closing scene.
Well, in the closing scene, Professor
a long
Langdon,
time ago.
right, he goes to the inverted pyramid, the Ayampe pyramid in front of the Louvre, and they refer that the tomb of Mary Magdalene is beneath the inverted pyramid, right? Now, what they show is one of the brass Arago markers that are on the Paris meridian.
Right, which I've seen. They're there.
Right, but this really doesn't exist on top of the inverted pyramid. They just added it in the movie.
Oh.
And on there, they're even showing you a compass direction that I'm talking about, where to the west it points directly to Oak Island and matches Nolan's Cross, and in the opposite direction, the arc on the globe created by using the Louvre as an axis mundi, for instance, which the Louvre used to be the royal palace of French kings and queens, points to Migdal, Israel, the birthplace of Mary Magdalene. So even they're showing you in the movie that her tomb is supposedly beneath the inverted pyramid. They're showing you a geographic array. They show the compass bearing right on the brass marker at the movie in the end.
Wow.
And this points directly to Oak Island, Nova Scotia.
Oh my gosh. What about, and I'm going back in my memory again, which is fastly fading in my antiquated age, but in the Church of Saint-Sulpice in Paris, there's that dolmen. And if I'm not mistaken, it's right on the meridian.
Well,
and
no, that one is a few hundred meters to the west of the actual Paris meridian. And that was used to do experiments by people from the Paris Observatory associated with the Cassini family, whose names, by the way, pop up many times in this story, where they could use that to measure feast days for the church and various other, they were experimenting with that. That was actually an experiment by astronomers to use an old cathedral to see how it could be used that way. And indeed, that's true in some cases. This isn't built into every cathedral. But even at the Vatican, they have a tower called the referred to as the Tower of the Wind sometimes, even though it's not octagonal, where they had a camera obscura or a little pinhole aperture in one of the walls.
Hidden camera.
Right. So every day at the same time, you could mark where the dot fell on the floor. And this gave you the heliacal, excuse me with that word, track of the sun that made this kind of figure 8 infinity symbol. So if you did it for each day, you could use that like a clock, so you could have more accuracy with regard to when Easter was and other feast days associated with the Christian faith. So it's not unusual for things like that, and I think that people at the Paris Observatory were curious about how it could be used and how accurate it was, and they were the ones who set that up at Saint Sulpice. And of course, we know Saint Sulpice is a collegiate church associated with the Sulpician Brotherhood, where it's like a college for the Catholic Church, where they educate some of the priests in technology like that. I mean, the Vatican even has an observatory in near Rome, south of Rome.
Castel Gandolfo. Exactly. Yep.
So they do have an interest in making sure that the correct time is being kept and the correct, plotting of locations on the earth is recorded.
Plus, you know what else they have in there? One of the world's largest collections of meteorites.
Yes, I've heard of that. That's fascinating, isn't it, that they have an interest in such a thing?
It is, and it makes me wonder if that's not a big part of these powerful observatories that they have. The one in Arizona is so near to that big giant crater, where that big meteor or asteroid or whatever, it was probably a meteor, hit.
Right. The Lucifer telescope.
That's the Lucifer. Oh my gosh. I remember, I mentioned this a week or two ago on the show that, when I first really became aware of that, and I remember like back in the mid 90s, the Vatican, someone asked, some Vatican spokesperson, what they would do if they, discovered alien life, and he said, we'll convert them to Christianity as we find them. And so everybody at that time went, yeah, see, the Vatican knows something about aliens, and, but the more time went by, and I started finding all these weird Vatican meteorite connections, I started thinking, wait a minute, they might be looking for, bodies that are headed our way. And they seem to be really interested in scooping up as many as they can, which is very interesting considering what, a lot of cultures believe that meteorites are a precious, item.
Of course.
A lot of native tribes, call them pieces of God. And, so I wonder, is there something, more to meteorites than what we know? Or, is that just, or they just think they're pretty and collecting them? What's the deal with the meteorites and the observatories?
Well, I haven't looked at that too much, but I definitely understand what you're saying, how anybody could be fascinated with these possibly little chunks of other worlds that have made their way to Earth, and studying them just like a scientist would. The church has an interest in them for various reasons that may be related to that as well, looking for clues of other life or of even, clues of the apocalypse or these kind of cyclical earth changes that a lot of people talk about that could be, have religious overtones as well as scientific overtones. There's always kind of a crossover that we can see in their interest of astronomy and other scientific pursuits, that they have their version or reasons why they would look at them, and practically minded people through time have always had their reasons for examining such things as well. And that could speak to why scientists were persecuted by the church for a time.
Ooh.
Astronomers, people like Giordano Bruno who were burned at the stake, and Galileo, Copernicus, and so on, who had all of these kind of oppositions or disputes with the church over their theories. And you can see that through time, too, with other, sort of intelligent rulers like Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II had a lot of disputes with the church over scientific issues, and he was very intelligent, and his Magi Michael Scott, for instance, was writing books about spherical geometry in the 13th century.
Wow.
So there's always been, and this speaks to one reason about what we're talking about with regard to these mysteries, about why scientists in the practical side of things were forced to kind of go underground. And anytime you have a persecuted group of people, especially of highly intelligent people that could think of things like this, they form an independent secret society, codes, ciphers, alchemical writing, secrets hidden in architecture and art, and things like that. So there's kind of this silent war that's been going on for centuries, too, with the church hiding things, too, showing their point of view, but with people like Sir Isaac Newton or earlier Michael Scott, the Scotus Magi of Charlemagne, all hiding these things so they wouldn't be persecuted.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wonder if there's rather than just, keeping secret, their personal holdings or, treasures that they had, if there's a real body of knowledge that has been purposely suppressed because of the independence that it might offer to an individual, rather than to feel like they had to go along with, with a particular religion, or, have an intercessor between themselves and the spiritual realm or God, because that's what, the Roman Church, taught, was that, you have to try to be perfect. You have to try to be like Jesus, but you can't. So we'll help you. You have to go through us. We will intercede for you with God. And maybe there's information that's out there that has been suppressed that would kind of let people know that, maybe they can accomplish their own spiritual life. I don't know.
No, certainly that's a great idea. And that even kind of starts to feed us into the belief in French nobles and other European nobles that they were related to Mary Magdalene,
mm-hmm.
and the divine right of kings, that they almost felt that they had as much of a right as the church to value and use these things as they saw fit. So this also created an underground stream of knowledge that kind of led to, I think, the whole Arcadian theme as it applies to astronomy and cartography and geodesy, led to almost every technical science we have in the world today. Like, we might not even be speaking here over the internet had not these things been hidden and developed in secret. And of course, here in the modern day, I think even the church is enlightened to the fact that those things shouldn't be controlled, that we all should have access to them to develop and make the world a better place. So, but in the past, it's always been this kind of silent war. I always refer to it as, of these things being hidden. Like, you would have to know the alchemical symbols or the way a certain scientist notated his findings. That might be a mystery to even figure that out.
Yeah.
To find some of these things. And that, of course, led to similar techniques being used, like all of the things hidden in the first folio of Shakespeare and other encoded parts of literature including Philip Sidney's Arcadia.
Could you talk a little bit about that, Shakespeare, and what was contained therein?
Well, a lot of people, I always point to my friend Peter Admonson, who really kind of cracked one of the codes in the, he'd be a great person to have on the show that cracked some of the codes in that he believes leads to Oak Island and a possible kind of Rosicrucian style chamber of the papers of Sir Francis Bacon, which is also another aspect of this. If we go all the way back to Charlemagne and the so-called Man in the Mountain mysteries, you can start to see how that's kind of the root of a lot of Rosicrucian belief of Christian Rosencrantz being entombed in an unknown location in a 7-sided chamber, in this case, with a library of Gnostic and scientific information along with golden riches. And a lot of the folklore associated with Charlemagne was appreciated by his progeny, Frederick II, who I already mentioned, Barbarossa, and others were kind of prompted to solve these mysteries. And this kind of led to what I believe the Rosicrucian thought, where there's a lot of value in leaving somebody a mystery that they have to solve as far as motivating them towards doing it. And it
rather than just saying, oh, here's the treasure.
Right. And in this case, for the first time, the treasure included a library.
Mm.
You see?
Now that would be a treasure, wouldn't it?
Right. So if we could have the Library of Alexandria, for instance.
Wow.
Just think what we could find out or understand more about the ancient world or science of the day. And it might even expose things we never knew before.
Do you recall when the library at Alexandria was destroyed by fire? And we're talking about Alexandria, Egypt, of course. Do you remember the sort of time period for that?
You know, I don't right off the top of my head.
I don't either, but I've always been interested in that. Yeah, probably Neutron knows.
Look it up, Neutron.
He knows
please.
everything.
Thank you.
But, I've always been fascinated and wondered, what I remember I had a conversation about this years ago with one of the authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, Michael Bagent. And we were talking about the Library of Alexandria and what, was lost to the world, but also what might have been. I can't imagine that every single thing was burned. I can't imagine that somebody didn't, secret out some of the more important things, or I don't know. I just feel like somebody snuck things out and they made their way somewhere else.
Well, part of that story also involves, that I've read before, that every ship came into port there, they would take whatever books they had and copy them. So, of course, things were coming from other places, so I'm sure there were other libraries and other kind of hidden places where these things were stored that, of course, they were all on paper or vellum or hide or whatever they were using to record it, which are kind of ephemeral. And that later speaks to concepts like the Masonic pillars of Boaz and Yakin, where the secrets of science and geometry were recorded in stone or brass, so they would last. So that speaks to why some of these secrets were hidden in monuments. They last longer. Paper goes away quickly, or whatever media you are using is subject to being burnt or rotting away or what have you, but stone monuments would last a lot longer. So that's why it's interesting to look at the geometry. It recorded all that. You have technical engineers making things where they have to have a scale to measure things with. They have to be aware of math, geometry, just to create these things. So that's kind of a school all of its own that recorded or preserved these things for us all as well. And that's one of the things that's so fascinating about the pyramids, for instance, or the Acropolis, or the great cathedrals of Europe.
I just looked up the library, try to figure it out, because it never said, I couldn't see like a date. So I just looked into the Wikipedia thing, and listen to this. This is from Wikipedia. It says, despite the widespread modern belief that the Library of Alexandria was burned once and cataclysmically destroyed, the library actually declined gradually over the course of several centuries. The decline began with the purging of intellectuals from Alexandria in 145 BC during the reign of Ptolemy VIII, which resulted in Aristarchus, the head librarian, resigning from his position and exiling himself to Cyprus. Many other scholars, including Dionysius Thrax and Apollodorus of Athens, fled to other cities where they continued teaching and conducting scholarship.
That speaks to the beginning of the Silent War.
So, it's not even clear how much was actually destroyed. So I've been under the mistaken idea that thing burned down.
I think there are a couple of instances where it did burn, though.
There was one in 48 BC.
That could have just been an accident, not necessarily an intentional.
It was, and it was by Caesar, Julius Caesar,
right,
during his civil war. But it said it's unclear how much was actually destroyed, and it seems to have either survived or been rebuilt shortly thereafter. So I got to look into this some more. Oh my goodness! Right. I'm glad you brought that up.
People have always been a threat to established systems, of government or religion that kind of shake things up a little bit, from time to time in history. And that kind of speaks to the, quote, dark ages in Europe, where a lot of these things were preserved by the Muslim world and the Jewish world that are the only reason we might know about them or didn't have to figure it all out over again as far as what happened in Europe. So that's an interesting concept there, that there's always a certain faction that may be more happy to keep people unenlightened or stupid.
Well, yeah, as ever. It's like, a lot of times, the way that I speak, with a bit of disdain, for the church, especially back in those days. It's not the idea of that belief system. It's the idea of the man-made construct that was set up and had its own agenda. So that, they had this base of this faith, which they were, in my opinion, selling to people. But there was definitely an element of crowd control in their raison d'etre.
Certainly.
That was, a way of keeping people sort of docile.
Right, and as time progressed, we even see political beliefs fulfilling the same part.
It's like scare people, and you can get them to do what you want, which is not good.
or limit what they know, or they use what they know to control a certain aspect of politics or faith to their desired ends. We see that all the time. If you look through history, it's always there.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say some things never change.
Right, and part of the Arcadia concept that I was referring to before is a way of preserving memory of certain regimes, of certain family groups and things like that contributed to all of what we're talking about as well. So they've left kind of a mystery school that involves all of this, what we're discussing.
Which encourages the individual to sort of follow their own path, in seeking out these things. It's really kind of a solitary endeavor. I think you would agree.
It's like going down the rabbit hole where there's all of these other choices, and you may go down one burrow there and find out that it's wrong.
Yeah, and have to turn
and
around
withdraw
and go back.
and get back to the main.
That's it.
Yeah, right. So it's I went through that when I started doing all this about 15 years ago. I was, led astray here and there. The first things I read had a motivation behind them that I later realized was there, and I went back, and that's one of the reasons I've kind of gotten a little more conservative as time went by, because you can start to see the wrong path a little bit, I believe.
You can definitely get led down the road, for sure. For sure. There are tricks and tricksters out there. And then also, there are just so many threads to it that it can get confusing. But I think what it just takes is time. Because over time, you start to see the same names popping up, the same ideas, the same symbols, the same values of certain things. So it's like, it's there for you. And it's almost like, you just got to keep looking at it. And then you'll start to see the patterns.
Absolutely. I agree.
Doesn't mean it's going to get you to the end, but at least you'll know what you're looking at,
Right. I would just say be patient and don't jump on every bandwagon that comes along.
Yeah,
I've tried to avoid that as well.
Don't marry yourself to one thesis, to one theme or idea. Be open about it. Look at the facts.
Sure. And there's different cultures that have their own version of this in India and China and many other places. In any kind of Aboriginal faith, it's always there, including Native Americans and others.
Totally.
So there's always a version of it to understand from a different cultural or intellectual perspective. There's no doubt about that.
Can make your head explode. You know what? We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to hear more from Cort Lindahl and his recent findings. Stay with us, everybody.
Folks, this is very important information. What's to be said about CBD? AncientLifeOil.com. Our CBD is made from hemp and has 0.003 THC, which means this wonderful product won't get you high, no matter what amount you take. What does CBD do for the body? My hands are tied. But you can Google CBD benefits and be astounded. When you're finished reading, you'll want to log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com and purchase. Life is good when you feel good. People are tired of pain. People are asking for non-GMO organic products to help them with, you fill in the blank. Legal in 49 states, and again, our CBD is made from hemp. Ancient Life Oil is about helping people one by one by one. If you wonder how good the product is, the CEO takes it every day without miss. AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. Have a great day.
A birthday without her mom. An anniversary without her husband. Her wedding day without her dad. These are the days when military families feel it most of all. The loss of their soldier, their sailor, their airman, their Marine, their Coast Guardsman. Families never forget their loved ones lost to war or illness or suicide. Families never forget, and neither do we. We are TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. We provide resources, support, and comfort to heal the hearts and meet the needs of grieving military families, all at no cost to them. Your generosity can make an enormous difference in the lives of the families of our fallen military heroes. Our military families need to know they are not alone and they are not forgotten. Show them your support at TAPS.org.
Every 2 seconds, someone needs blood. Whether it's a natural disaster or one single child suffering from illness, the American Red Cross stands ready to supply blood when it's most needed. But blood is a perishable product. Therefore, it must continuously be replenished. You can safely donate blood every 56 days. The need is constant and patients are waiting. Call your American Red Cross at 1-800-GIVE-LIFE to schedule your life-saving appointment. Please give blood today. Patients are depending on you.
Hey members, the new KGRA-DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-DB.
Your alternative talk radio contact. KGRADB.com.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Night Vision. I am your host, Renee Barnett. Tonight, we're talking with author, researcher, Cort Lindahl. And before we get back to Cort, I wanted to just mention, as I did last week, that Jonathan Venkin, who I had on recently, his new book is now out and released for, I think it's the paperback is on sale right now. So go on over to Amazon and look up Jonathan's new book. It's called Close to Zero. Some of you are going to get mad. Some of you are going to get scared, but it's about the pandemic and how it was purposely let to run wild in our country. So have a look. It's taken from news reports. So have a look at it. It's all truth. See how you decipher it yourself. But I mentioned, I heard from Jonathan today that it has just dropped, so it's now available on Amazon. So I'm going to get busy on writing my review on it, which is going to be a good one. And I hope you guys enjoy it if you get it. And if you feel so inclined, write a review for him. So, and also have a look at Cort Lindahl's books while you're on there, because he's got a bunch on there. But anyway, Cort, so we kind of got onto the Library of Alexandria and all these other seemingly disparate ideas, but they all are linked. And I think that's what's so crazy about it, because if you dig deep enough, you can find a link among all these things, even though you might find some of them in the Middle East, some in Europe, some in America, some in other places. Like you said, even Asia have their versions of these mysteries and some of these type structures and things. So now I know you found a lot of stuff in the New World right up there in your own neighborhood, which is just really wild. I remember a few years ago, you told me first about the Frenchman's Tower. And such an amazing story, but it does seem like there's a link with Northern California and these other mysteries, Rennes-le-Château in particular. So can you talk a little bit about your work up there? And what reminded me of that was when you mentioned the Man in the Mountain theme, which always makes my mind go to Mount Shasta, which is up near you, and you've done a lot of work over there, and how they have that myth over there that they are honoring with the Man in the Mountain, and I guess with the idea of Saint-Germain and, you know, the person who never dies living there in the mountain. So can you talk a little bit about how you first stumbled on to these connections? Did you recognize them, or did you just see them like, oh, that's interesting, and then the more you dug into it, you realized, or did you just recognize instantly, wait a minute, there's something there that is connected to all these other things I'm looking into?
Sure. Well, I first became aware of the Frenchman's Tower in Palo Alto because I was working there, and there just happened to be an article in the newspaper about it while I was there. And, of course, this was years before I ever started even thinking about it. But later, at first I was led to all of this by asking the question, why did Thomas Jefferson build octagonal structures or towers? And as I studied on, I found all these instances of towers being used as astronomical observatories that define time and space. And I saw that it became kind of an alchemical tradition of part of this kind of hidden stream of knowledge. So one day I remembered the Frenchman's Tower, and I decided to look into that story. And this happened all in the 1870s, significantly before the time of Father Saunière at Rennes-le-Château, or when the Tour Magdala was built, or the Torre Magdala in Girona, and other things that may be all connected together in that realm. But it was interesting that this man was a Frenchman whose real name was Paulin Caperon. But when he came to California, he had been exiled from France over some financial issues that he was involved in financing railroads in France. And this was all at the same time that Henri V, the Duc de Chambord, had been exiled, the rightful king of France in theory, that a lot of French people had come to America to make their fortunes because of political reasons in France. So Paulin Caperon used the name of Peter Kautz while he came to Palo Alto, which was then known as Mayfield, California. And while he was there, he built this very successful stock farm, breeding prize bulls and racing horses, and did it very successfully. And of course, the locals were all up in arms. He built this mysterious tower. What was he doing there? There were tunnels near the tower that ran back into the hills. And it turned out that the tower in part was a library. And any Rennes-le-Château fan will see the parallel between the Tour Magdala that Father Saunière also used for a library. And it was said that he had all of these kind of esoteric books from the House of Elsevier in Holland that covered all of these kind of alchemical and odd subject matters during that era. So he was kind of somewhat made a splash there in early California in what was then called Mayfield before it was known as Palo Alto, and built this strange tower that's still there today. So that alone.
When did he build it?
I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was in the latter 1870s.
But he built that before the Tour Magdala in Rennes-le-Château was built, you said, right?
That wasn't built until later, after, I believe, right around the turn of the century. If I'm not wrong about that. But it fulfilled the same kind of purpose, and he was also a royalist in France. And it's interesting that he used the name Peter Kautz because Count Peter Kautz, who he said was his cousin. And, of course, that Kautz name is one of the biggest banks in England, and is also where Henri V did his banking. And we all know there's a theory at Rennes-le-Château that states that Henri V's wife may have financed or backed Father Saunière, and this could be the true source of his money. I know there's lots of other theories, but this is one of them. So that's a strange connection via name. And later we also learned that Paulin Caperon had a chateau in Evian, France, where Henri V also had a home. So there's these kind of tenuous connections.
Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. That there's no smoking gun here, but it's a kind of a representative, at the very least, of the same kind of values being expressed in the building of what I term an alchemical tower, or an axis mundi that I described before, where this means something to the person that established it, as it's the center of their domain. So eventually, Paulin Caperon was able to return to France because of political changes in the regime in France, and he sold his stock farm to Leland Stanford. And today, the Frenchman's Tower is part of the property of Stanford University in Palo Alto.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. That's so wild.
Yes, and it's still there. Anybody can go see it. And at about the time I discovered this, I was looking into Mount Shasta.
Oh my gosh. That is so...
I discovered that the tower was due south of the peak of Mount Shasta, and that could have been part of the creation of a prime meridian that speaks to a lot of these kind of interesting stories. As we know, at Mount Shasta, there's the story of the city of Telos within Mount Shasta.
Oh, that's right.
That is kind of a folklore story that speaks to the man in the mountain mythology of Charlemagne, but there's even another more interesting later story that emerged in the 1930s involving a man named J.C. Brown. J.C. Brown kind of pops up in Stockton, California in the 1930s and claims that he was a mining engineer and that he had found this tunnel going into Mount Shasta where he found tombs and rooms and like a village in there with mummies, interesting technology, and even kind of refers to a Mormon overtone of these golden tablets with strange script on them. So that in my opinion, is kind of a folklore story. It may not be true.
Right.
But you can see that somebody was aware of this mythology and the stories of the city of Telos and Mount Shasta and the legend of J.C. Brown are also related to the man in the mountain mythology that feeds back to Rosicrucian lore of R.C. Christian being entombed in a mountain somewhere. So really one of the most interesting things to me was the link to Chico, California, where I live, because here we have the Hooker Oak that is no longer there, but the site of it is marked, and there's a plaque there and a little enclosure where the oak tree used to be.
What happened to it?
It just got old finally and died. Basically. It was hit by lightning as well, Diane is telling me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, Diane even has my wife has a leaf from the Hooker Oak that she went
oh my
and got
gosh.
There. It fell down, yeah. But it's interesting that it's named for J.D. Hooker, who was the brother-in-law of Charles Darwin.
That's so wild.
Right. So when J.D. Hooker came to Chico, he was friends with the founder of the town and his wife, Annie Bidwell. And they made this trip to Mount Shasta with John Muir, the famous naturalist. And even in John Muir's diary, he says that J.D. Hooker regaled them with stories of his trips to the Himalayas while they were at Mount Shasta, because Mount Shasta reminded him of his travels in Tibet and Nepal that he had done in the 1840s. So that's interesting that it's coming from John Muir, but that's really one of the earliest references to a comparison of Mount Shasta to the mystical city of Agartha in Tibet, the city hidden in the mountain.
Yeah.
So sure as heck later, this mythology develops at Mount Shasta of the city of Telos being within the mountain and the appendant legend of J.C. Brown as well. So that's a weird little connection to Chico, where I live, and all of that. I believe that kind of spurred the whole imagination of people to kind of develop this folklore of Mount Shasta in that regard. And so it's all hooked up also to the Frenchman's Tower, because a lot of this kind of New Age point of view was developed by French authors in the 19th century as well that referred to values of things like this. So it's interesting that this connection kind of emerged in California with regard to Mount Shasta.
California of all places. It's so wild. I'm going to have to come up there. I think it's like an 8-hour drive from where I am. But I have another question from Neutron in the chat room, Cort, which you're not going to believe this question. Just let me read it to you, and then you'll know why I said you're not going to believe it. Neutron says, Cort, have you ever heard anything about Father Saunier of Rennes-le-Chateau Chapel building a pentagon-shaped trap prison in the building to hold an old negative entity or to protect the DNA of the royal bloodline of Jesus? Now, do you
No,
know why I said you're not going to believe it?
Well, that's okay.
We just talked about it,
Right.
didn't we?
In a way,
weren't we talking
I've never
about
heard
Solomon?
that story.
Weren't we talking about?
Sure. Well, no,
Okay,
that does
I haven't
go back
heard that
to the
particular story, but we talked about the statue, the baptismal font inside the Church of Mary Magdalene at Rennes-le-Château, which is supposedly a statue of the demon Asmodeus. And, there's a whole, Solomonic connection with the demon Asmodeus and with capturing it and keeping it hidden, keeping it subdued. And it seemed to me, and I think you sort of acknowledged this, that it had something to do with water. And there's water underneath that area right next to the church at Rennes-le-Château. It's a water source. There's actually a spigot on the outside of this little building, which is loosely called Saunier's office. And at one time, when the village caught fire, the story goes, if it's true, I believe that it is, that they wanted to use the water to put out the fire. And Saunier had already passed away by this time, and his confidant slash maid slash lover, I think, Marie Denarnaud, would not allow the village to access that water to put out the fire. And I always, after I heard about, the Solomon story and Asmodeus, and sort of clicked in with the idea that there's this Asmodeus feature in the church, I wondered whether, there was a story about Asmodeus being kept at bay. I know there is a story about Asmodeus being kept up there, but being kept in the water, I didn't know. But it's just so interesting that Neutron brought that up, because we literally just had this conversation, and we were both talking about, we'll look into that. So I haven't heard that specifically about a Pentagon-shaped trap prison, although he wasn't asking me, he was asking you, Cort. So,
no, I've never heard that story.
I haven't either.
But it makes sense given the the lore we're talking about, that even somebody would think that or come up with that point of view, because it matches the story and the shape and everything of the pentagon or pentagram that was on the seal of Solomon, his ring that he bound the fallen angels with to help him build the Temple of Solomon. And Asmodeus was one of these demons. But interestingly, part of that story was also Asmodeus assuming the identity of King Solomon for a period. That he had used his, quote, supernatural powers to eject Solomon several hundred miles away. And he goes through all of these adventures getting back to Jerusalem when he comes back and takes his throne back from Asmodeus, who had done all kinds of devious things while he was gone. So that's interesting in light of the Rennes-le-Château story as well, that Asmodeus kind of represents this classic view of the treasure guardian. There's lots of folklore stories of the, quote, devil guarding a treasure. And thanks to my friend Brennan Hale for pointing that out to me, that's even a feature in many video games where there's a treasure guardian. And this is a common factor in a lot of treasure stories. I mean, even at Oak Island, there are these stories of strange lights and ghosts being seen on the island. And a lot of times, if there's something real there, also these stories will be developed to keep people away.
Right.
So a part of, a lot of these secret societies and secret streams of knowledge that we've been discussing does involve parts of it that say, stay away, you don't want to come here, that parts of those stories are intentionally developed that way to keep away the just casually curious people as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of instill some fear there. But that's an interesting theory, Neutron. That's pretty cool. I'll look into that some more.
Yeah, me too. That does sound interesting because I already had that kind of thought in my head, but it didn't come from anything concrete. It was just an idea that I had. Like, could that have been, why in the world would she not have allowed them to use the water to keep the village from burning down?
Right. Well, this feeds us into the story, too, that's present in the book Voyage à Rennes-les-Bains by Auguste Labouisse Roquefort, where in the book, and this book was printed in 1832, where he tells the story of the devil guarding a treasure on Mont Blanchefort, which is one of the tips of the pentagram that Henry Lincoln identified in the landscape there as well. So that's an interesting read. That's going to be included in my next book, the whole narrative of that story as well. And that, I believe, is part of the reason that Saunier was also aware of it, because 1832 is significantly before his time there, that this story was likely part of local folklore for a very long time, going back who knows how far.
Yeah.
To the time of Dagobert II, even. So
yeah,
these
most
are
likely.
The kind of stories that pop up in association with treasures as well. It involves the devil, the treasure guardian, guarding the treasure. And actually that story, again, leads us to a very strange link to the Anson family of Shugborough Hall, where we know that one of the parchments that Father Saunier found mentions the Nicolas Poussin painting and another painting by 10 years that are supposed to be germane to the whole mystery. So at Shugborough Hall, of course, we have the Shepherd's Monument that shows the Poussin painting in mirror image bas-relief, and then we find that Lady Anson from the early to mid 19th century was also a famous painter and copyist, and she had actually copied the 10 years painting, and this was long before any of this was ever mentioned at Rennes-le-Château. So as I began to look into Auguste Labouisse Roquefort, who I'll just call Roquefort from now on, he had also written another book where he had written an elegy for his friend Pierre Hubert Anson.
The Ansons again.
Yeah.
All these same people.
In the book, he even says that Pierre Hubert Anson is related to Admiral Anson of Shugborough Hall.
Wow.
Now, whether that's true or not is another question, but here we have somebody who is saying something that displays that they are in the know of what's going on.
Speaking of Shugborough, I know that there have been some researchers or people that feel that they have solved the riddle of the inscription on the Shepherd's Monument on the grounds of Shugborough Hall, which is basically the Poussin painting in reverse. Do you feel like anybody has really figured that out? Or do you have a stab at what it says?
I don't have a stab at the coded part, but my theory about that comes from just examining the artwork. And what you have is the representation of the Poussin shepherds of Arcadia. But it's important to note that on the Shepherd's Monument, there's a strange reliquary or box atop
on top of it
that is not included in the Poussin painting. And it is my contention, here we go back to the legend of Aristomenes I mentioned earlier. That is Aristomenes' box that includes the quote treasure that was hidden in Arcadia. And then even it's very clear in the Shepherd's Monument that the man is pointing to the R in Arcadia in the inscription. And what I found was Acadia which used to be the name for Nova Scotia, is kind of a French colloquial slang term for Arcadia.
Oh my gosh, I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you, why do you think they dropped the R when they came to the New World?
No, they mean the same thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people are unaware of that. And really this goes back to the story in Philip Sidney's book Arcadia that I mentioned before. Because in the book, the hero of the book creates this fake money pit that's beneath an oak tree, and he kind of convinces the guardian of his lady love that there's a treasure there, that he should go dig it up just so he can get away with Miss Pamela. So he convinces Demetrius to go and dig up this pit, and it's described as being a treasure pit that he could tell had been dug up before. And when he gets to the bottom, there's a box atop a, quote, graven or inscribed stone that is Aristomenes' box. So Philip Sidney's even referring to this in his book. And within the box, in this case, is only pieces of vellum with poetry on it. And so Demetrius, the servant that he tricked into thinking there was a treasure there, digs up the stone that also has an inscription on it that's reminiscent of the 90-foot stone at Oak Island that was found at the 90-foot level. And under that, there's another piece of vellum that includes a poem that tells him he had been tricked into going there, that there's no real treasure, that he was expecting to pull the stone up and there would be a treasure vault beneath the stone. So this story even refers to golden acorns beneath the oak tree and everything, just like the story of the three young men finding the treasure at Oak Island. So what you're looking at on the Shepherd's Monument with this strange reliquary or box that is atop the tomb, I believe is Aristomenes' box, is what that's supposed to represent. Because Aristomenes buried the treasure in Arcadia that was a statue of Pallas Athena, or the tablet that revealed secrets about the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece. So that's all a symbolic representation of the Anson family, kind of telling you that there's a mystery there in Arcadia in Nova Scotia. And if you look into the history of the Anson family, Admiral Anson was involved in capturing large amounts of gold from the French on several different occasions, and the Spanish as well, including large treasures that went missing from the D'Anville expedition and both of the sackings of Fortress Louisbourg when the British attacked that, the French fortress there. So there is ample rationale to assume that they may have hidden something somewhere in Nova Scotia, and Oak Island, of course, has all the legendary and mythological aspects that fit the story in the description of the money pit.
Yeah. I mean, do you think there's a snowball's chance in hell that there's still something there? Because it's, in my mind, if there was something, if there was a treasure there, I think it's gone by now.
Well, that's entirely possible, but we would have to look to the efforts of the Laguna brothers there, you know, kind of driving these cans or big metal pipes into the ground, and they've come up with some human remains and pieces of parchment and pieces of leather at great depths that match the story of something being hidden there. And what is strange is that as I researched the Anson family and a lot of their family connections, I was led to this man named Sir George Bruce in Scotland, who had actually constructed an undersea coal mine in the late 16th century. And he did this by creating an artificial island in the Firth of Forth, or the bay there near Coolross where he lived. And he sunk a shaft in in this artificial island that went under the water and then connected it laterally to the coal diggings on shore. This was for a coal mine. So this illustrates that that technology was present even in the later 1500s, that it was possible to make something like the money pit. So as I researched George Bruce even further, he kind of had a fetish for Philip Sidney and his work. He even included illustrations from a book of emblems on the wood paneling in his estate in Coolross that depict even a coconut palm. And we know there's been coconut husks found on Oak Island that have been there for a long time. They even still occasionally find them on the TV show today. So that's a non-native thing that's used to soak up water. And it's possible George Bruce even used these as part of his moat pit, he called it, the shaft that he sunk that went under the water there. And then even as I researched him further, I found out he was related to the Primrose family, who do have family connections to the Anson family and a lot of their associated families. So just the knowledge that something like that could have possibly been built could have at least added to the Oak Island story, if not the truth that the money pit could actually be constructed. So these kinds of things were possible at an early date in history. So as far as that goes, it's possible that the money pit could have actually been built and actually contained something. Now, with regard to something still being there, we don't know. But, I mean, if somebody left something there, they would at least try to get it, I'm sure, if they had knowledge of it. And, I mean, I even found an interesting stream of information that says that British nobility knew about all of this. And there's an unusual value of Philip Sidney's book, Arcadia, and several different instances of this in English history. For instance, Charles I's last words were from the book. One of his attendants was, two of his attendants were from the Herbert family, including one of the nephews of Philip Sidney. And Charles's last words were Pamela's prayer from the book. That also includes the story of a money pit. And then this is really crazy. Let me tell this part first.
Okay, but I want you to tell me exactly what he said when you get done with that, because I want to know exactly.
Okay.
I mean, did he say the whole poem out, or did he?
Yes, he said the whole thing. And really, the poem, part of the reasons he was beheaded was his wife's Catholic faith, that they suspected he was actually a closet Catholic at the time when this wasn't kosher, for lack of a better term, in England or Great Britain. That the poem refers to religious tolerance or tolerating people who have different beliefs and things like that. And that may have been one of the reasons he had chosen that. But what was interesting is
who
recently
chooses their last words? You know what I mean? You usually don't really know what your last words are going to be. So how poignant.
Charles I, the king chose this himself personally.
So how poignant is that that's what he did? And then he said it and then he died?
Then they chopped his head off.
So that was what he said just before.
Yes. And
so he did plan it. Yeah, of course he planned it.
Well, it's interesting because both of his attendants were from the Herbert family, and one of them was Philip Herbert, who had been named for Philip Sidney, his uncle. Philip Herbert and William Herbert were the subjects of the dedication of the first folio of Shakespeare. And so it is said that Thomas Herbert, one of his attendants, even ended up owning Charles I's copy of the first folio. So even later, we find that I was watching this TV series, Victoria, about Queen Victoria. And one of the names of one of the episodes was Et in Arcadia. A character in the show is Sir George Anson, a direct descendant of Admiral Anson of Shugborough Hall, who was Victoria's husband, Prince Albert's private secretary. And we know that Queen Victoria's father, Prince Edward, lived in Halifax, Nova Scotia when the money pit was discovered. And that's not even the beginning of the value of Arcadia on the part of the Stuart family, the exiled kings of England, Ireland, and Scotland. There's other examples that, in fact, Queen Elizabeth built Star Castle on the Isles of Scilly, which is part of England. And after the English Civil War, which ended in the beheading of Charles I, his son, Charles II, took refuge on the Isles of Scilly and lived in Star Castle on the Isles of Scilly that had been created by Queen Elizabeth. And moreover, as I studied that, literary scholars contend that Star Castle was based on the description of the star-shaped octagonal lodges present in the pages of Philip Sidney's book Arcadia.
Oh my gosh.
So here's Charles I actually taking refuge there after his father had quoted from the book. And then eventually Charles II is exiled in France for a time, where he lived with his cousins, the King of France, because his mother was Henrietta Marie, the daughter of Marie de Medici, the Queen of France.
Goodness, yeah.
So you can see the whole theme of Arcadia coming from Virgil through the Byzantine rulers to the de Medici family and the Anjou families to the royalty of France, who we know Louis XIV ended up owning the Poussin painting, and so on. So that value of Arcadia is directly coming to Charles I via his wife Henrietta Marie, and of course Charles II's mother was a de Medici.
Now, is the original Poussin Shepherds of Arcadia painting at is it in the Louvre or is it in at Versailles?
Yes, it's in the Louvre.
I thought so. So
That
how
was
did
put there
how did
after
it end
the
up
French
getting
Revolution. It was put
okay.
there after the French Revolution, and it's, as I
that
discussed
makes sense.
earlier, it's displayed right on the Paris Meridian within the museum.
Yes. That's right.
And as we know, the Paris Meridian is part of the Rennes-le-Chateau story as well. The Paris Meridian goes just through Rennes-le-Ban, the eastern tip of the star of the pentacle that Henry Lincoln supposes in the landscape is within a few hundred meters of touching the Paris Meridian. And this is one of the things that involves the geographic clues that are part of the Arcadian theme via the pole star being in the tail of Ursa Minor, who is Arcus, the namesake of Arcadia.
Now, didn't you tell me one time that the meridian actually was moved, or was it done? Was it remapped by the Cassinis?
The Cassinis legally defined it for the first time.
Okay.
Because they had more advanced astronomical technology and more accurate clocks and things like that, but it had always been supposed long prior to that. That this was the time reference that all of France referred to in their navy, in their colonies across the ocean and everything. This was the standard of time that eventually later became the Greenwich Meridian in England, that the whole world uses now. But even if you look at older French maps from that period, from the, anywhere from the 16th to the 18th century, that they're still their latitude and longitude is based on the Paris meridian and not the Greenwich meridian like it is today. So they had their own meridian. This is part of what I spoke of, how they use those meridians to define their own domain, which relates to time and space as well.
Yeah. Who were the Cassinis either beholden to or in league with? I mean, who were what was their stance on things?
Well, they ran the Paris Observatory for 3 generations.
Right.
Of their family, where they were in charge of the observatory. They created the famous map of France that was very accurate and even holds up today in many ways. Yes. Where that's part of the story of Rennes-le-Château from many people's point of view. That this is one of the things I've seen throughout the whole story too, that land surveyors and cartographers actually travel to these regions. Like they had a cartographer working for them in the Rennes-le-Château area for months, taking readings and measurements, plotting where all the towns were and things like that. So if there is some kind of sacred geometry in the landscape and the arrangement of towns and villages, as many people suggest, that they would have been aware of this. And they are also part of the story of Parios that is connected to Rennes-le-Château as well. I think it was Cassini III, they referred to him as that had a base of operations in Opoules-Parios, not far from the actual town of Parios, and Fortress Salvatierre there. That is, people suspect were involved in this story of how Father Saunière had the brass diorama of the Parios area that kind of represented a New Jerusalem kind of view of things, that, you know, Jesus's tomb was marked on there, as well as other features in that kind of desolate area around Parios there.
And, you know, that place is very strange. It's kind of spooky and weird. There's all kinds of kind of negative stories about that area, scary stories and things. I've heard people that I know say they had these really weird experiences from everything from, you know, like bad feelings to actually being run out of there and that sort of thing. It's sort of a place. I can't remember exactly how far it is from, you know, like Rennes-le-Château, Esperanza area. It's not that far, but many times when you try to go there, it's all blocked off. You can't get in. And I've had friends that have gone down there and been turned back. And, we did manage to get in, the last time I was there, which was year before last. Obviously I didn't get to go this past year. But it was a very, very odd place. And I mean, just to add to the air of weirdness, the postal code for Opoules-Parios is 66600.
Oh no, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Absolutely. Google it.
All right.
And it's just very weird. And I know, when we went there a couple of years back, I was with James Martin and, another friend of ours, Jeannie, who, has a place there in France and is a big, Rennes-le-Château mystery buff. And we got out there and we went up to the door, and James had this different equipment, these gauges and things that measured electromagnetic activity and that sort of thing. And when he would put it near the door, which was locked, of the church there in Parios, the machine would just go off the charts. And he said, as he held this machine, he said it seemed like something was passing back and forth in front of the door, because it would, you know, flip out, then it would go down and flip out again. And so it just added, you know, to the dark flavor of the place. But what, other than, these crazy, weird stories about Paralos. What is the connection, the overall connection? What is it that's connected to Paralos, or how does that fit into this whole thing?
Well, the Cassini family took observations from Opul Parios in that area that aided them in an experiment to determine the exact size and shape of the Earth.
Why there?
Because they needed a diagonal that could reach to the farthest northeast corner of France that they could compare to a line of longitude there. And the star sightings and ephemera that they collected by doing this helped them determine for the first time that the Earth is 6 miles shorter over the poles than it is around the equator. So the Earth is a slightly oblique spheroid. It's not a perfect sphere. And that makes sense the way the Earth rotates, that it might bulge a little bit in the middle compared to going over the poles. So this made even navigation, long-distance calculation of kind of some of the things I'm talking about, arcs on the globe, more accurate. And even Cassini IV, the last Cassini, who wasn't the director of the Paris Meridian, because this was after the Revolution, even corresponded with Thomas Jefferson about how to use nautical chronometers to establish very accurate prime meridians. And we see that even in recorded history, Thomas Jefferson applied meridians to both of his structures of Poplar Forest and Monticello, and then created the famous White House Meridian in Washington, D.C. And interestingly, at first I assumed that Thomas Jefferson learned all of this in France. But as I studied his family background, he was aware of this from the time he was young, that it was part of the legacy of his Randolph family, of his mother. That even Thomas Jefferson is related to Philip Sidney, who wrote the book Arcadia. Thomas Jefferson, his forebear, Thomas Randolph, the diplomat, was the brother-in-law of Sir Francis Walsingham, the so-called spy master of Queen Elizabeth. Philip Sidney was the son-in-law of Sir Francis Walsingham. So though not a blood relation, they have a relation via the Walsingham family.
Right, a family connection.
Right. Still even more interestingly, one of his first forebears in Virginia named his plantation house near Williamsburg, or between Williamsburg and Richmond, Wilton House. And Wilton House is the home of Mary Sidney Herbert, the Countess of Pembroke, the sister of Philip Sidney, and Philip Sidney wrote the book Arcadia at Wilton House. Then I looked further, and subsequent members of the Randolph family were named Philip Sidney Randolph and Algernon Sidney Randolph, and I think we talked about that a little bit on the last show. So this is where Thomas Jefferson was initiated into all of this, and then we have the Octagonal Powder Magazine in Williamsburg, which was never built as a powder magazine. That just became known as that over time, is a copy of the Tower of the Winds of Athens. So he was taught all of this and knew all of this about the French noble value of this concept, the English value of this concept, the de Medici value. All of the history of this he knew before he ever went to France during the American Revolution.
Do you think that's why he went to France?
I think it was known that he was intelligent enough and was aware of these things, that he was the spy master of the United States, in a way. Diplomat, just like his forebear Thomas Randolph. And interestingly, this is really interesting, that a later Thomas Randolph, that just was a little bit younger than the diplomat, was a contemporary poet in the Shakespearean age. And he was even part of the so-called Tribe of Ben Ben Jonson, who wrote the dedication of the first folio of Shakespeare, dedicated to Philip and William Herbert, the nephews of Philip Sidney. So it all goes back from an American and English perspective to their Arcadian value comes via Philip Sidney, who may have realized all of this during his grand tour as a young man in Europe, that he kind of became aware of this stream of a value of Arcadia, because it had even been part of art and literature, and he was aware of who Virgil was, so it wasn't that new to him, but he gained an appreciation of the way the French and other people in Rome, we have the Academy of Arcadia that we don't have time to get into now, probably, that he became aware of this. So it's all part of even intelligence services, of knowing the cultural values of people you may have conflicts with.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Boy, the time has flown. We're getting close to the end. Before we do that, I want you to please give out your information again in case people have tuned in later, since we mentioned it sort of at the top of the show. But your blog spot or your blog site, your YouTube, and everything. And of course, your books are available on Amazon.com, and just do a search for the books on Amazon. Bradbury Cort, C-O-R-T, Lindahl, L-I-N-D-A-H-L.
Or just Cort Lindahl will work. Yeah, just Cort Lindahl.
Yeah, you can get it, but your full name's on the book, so I thought I'd be fancy about it.
Right.
But so in your survivalcell.blogspot.com.
Correct.
Is your
blog.
And
then the Cort Lindahl channel on YouTube.
On YouTube.
You guys can all get me on Facebook or Twitter even. And also I have a Patreon account where I post a little bit of information there for patrons only that will be part of the book. And eventually I'll make a video about it that's there for everybody as well. So if you feel like chipping in there, that would be great. Or just watch the videos.
That would be fantastic. And if you watch those videos, hit the like button. That always helps. I know YouTube posters, the likes help, the subscriptions even better. So subscribe,
hit the notifications.
Hit the notification bell.
Exactly.
Get all Cort stuff. Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way. And now I want to give my listeners a little bit of a warning of what's coming up.
Oh, no.
on June 4th, on Night Vision on KGRA, you will actually be dealing not only with my weird Southern drawl voice, but you will also be beholding my mug, because we are going on video as of June 4th. I'm not super excited about it, but I'm getting more excited by the day. As a lot of you guys know, I do a lot of work in television, but almost always on the other side of the camera, not in front of the camera. So I hope you guys will bear with me as I get my bearings and get used to doing the video part. I was telling, I think it was you, Cort, earlier today, or it might have been Bill, or it might have been both of you, that I'm always doing all kinds of stuff while we're doing the show. I'm reaching for this, doing that, drinking something, maybe even munching on something. I mute so that I can cough or whatever. So I'm going to have to reevaluate my whole thing, because everything that I do, everyone will be seeing. And so
you have to change your ways, Renee.
I am. I'm going to have to really straighten up and fly right. I just don't know how that's going to work out.
Me too.
But what have you got coming up, Cort? What do you, now, haven't you just finished another book?
Yes,
is that the one that we posted the cover to, the last cover that I?
Yes, it's going to be called Timeless Arcadia, and it's going to include my solution to the Oak Island story in there. That includes a little bit of the information we were able to talk about, and a lot of other stories about other lost treasures that also involve the theme of Arcadia, that I've kind of expanded on from my last book, Oak Island and the Arcadian Mysteries. So look forward to that coming out in 2 or 3 weeks. I have a proof copy coming I'm going to use to edit the final draft and everything, so I have to do all that before it'll come out.
So there's nothing on Amazon about that particular book right now? Like you can't
that's going to be in
it or anything?
About a month that will be available, and I'll definitely make everyone aware of that, including you.
Yeah, let me know, and I will definitely announce it because I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested. And it sounds to me like it is kind of a drawing together of this information, which I think is going to be really valuable in sort of clarifying some of these things and pointing up the commonalities of these different sites and mysteries. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to have a one about 20-page chapter within the book that kind of lays the value of Arcadia out over time, starting with the poet Virgil and the Greek mythology before that, and then take you all the way up through the story I've kind of touched on somewhat here tonight, that includes all of these different values of it and different national values of it, including the American value of it I just described in Virginia and the colonies. And later, too, like you pointed out earlier, the Hudson River School painter Thomas Cole also was aware of this and illustrated that in his work.
Oh, I got to have that one. That is going to be good because I know he knows something. I don't know it, but I just sense it, from his work. This guy, he knows something. And then, I first saw his paintings and was really attracted to them before I realized he was an American painter. And I kind of almost thought, I thought this was, connected with, all these things. And then I realized, well, yeah, it is. He definitely was onto something. His work is just absolutely amazing and beautiful.
Right. The whole Hudson River School was aware of it, and they were associated with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who I've contended was aware of all of this, the whole scope of it going back to Dante. Longfellow was the first one to translate Dante into English, etc. So There you go. More next time.
All right. Well, you got to let us know when that book is coming out so that I can announce it and put it up on Facebook and all that stuff. And we are all out of time. I mean, can you believe 2 hours just flew by like that?
Flew by.
That is crazy. It's past your bedtime, Cort.
All right. Wind me up and let me go. I could probably go for 2 more hours if I had to. So
tell your lovely wife.
Stories.
Tell your lovely wife, Diane, we all say hello and thank you for putting up with us and disturbing your evening, your Friday evening. Absolutely. So everybody, please stay tuned for what's ahead. Don't forget, it's going to be June 4th when we go live video. So don't be scared when you see me. Take care, everybody. Good night.